Hello and welcome back to Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. We're going to have another conversation with a changemaker working to accelerate the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. And today we're going to talk the carbon impact of our pets, particularly dogs. The American Pet Products Association reports that about 90 million dogs lived in U.S. homes as of 2019, but ownership jumped during the pandemic, and there are a lot more now. According to a study conducted by UCLA, pets consume about a quarter of the meat produced annually in the United States, and meat accounts for the largest share of our food supply's environmental impact. Owning a small dog can have the same impact as driving a Toyota Land Cruiser 6,200 miles a year, according to Mossy.Earth. So for every pound of beef in dog food replaced by plant-based alternatives, we can reduce GHG emissions by as much as 26.5 pounds. And since they consume about 23.5 million pounds of meat annually, even small changes in our dogs' diets would make a big difference in our nation's carbon footprint. But of course, changing our dogs' diets need to be done carefully. And our guest today is Dr. Danielle Bernal, who is a veterinarian at Wellness Natural Pet Food. She's here to talk about how to switch. She recommends switching to plant-based foods and is going to discuss the health benefits and animal health issues to track when adopting more plant-based foods for your dog. Wellness Natural Pet Food recently introduced its first no-meat product. It's called Wellness Core Digestive Health Plant-Based, and it's a probiotic-coated kibble made with egg protein. You can learn more about wellness at wellnesspetfood.com. It's all one word, no dash, no space, wellnesspetfood.com. Welcome to the show, Danielle. How are you?
Very good, thank you. It's some really interesting facts you just shared there.
Well, we try to set the stage, but I want to ask a really basic question. We tend to think of dogs because they're related to wolves as carnivores. Are dogs naturally carnivores or omnivores by nature?
Yeah, so from a biological perspective, dogs have evolved from their wolf ancestor. I think there's two main ways that they did differentiate from the wolf. The first one is that they really had genes that were responsible for behavior traits. That's how we've had dogs go from one grey wolf to now over 400 different breeds, with everything from a Chihuahua to a Great Dane. The other thing that's changed from that evolutionary process from the grey wolf was that dogs have actually, over thousands of years, actually developed genes to be able to digest carbohydrates. And that's one of the key factors, that having that, increased enzymes to be able to digest starch, it means that they could use that for energy. And over time, they've actually now moved to a classification as an omnivore. And what that means is that they therefore need a lower amount of total dietary protein. They don't have the strict amino acid requirements. They can synthesize those if they're getting a plant-based diet, for instance. And that, indicates that, yes, whilst we think of them as, a meat-based animal who is a hunter, they actually can be classified and are classified as that omnivore today.
So it sounds like just based on the assumptions we have about our dogs, we're feeding them too much meat. How much should a dog's diet consist of meat?
Yeah, so while we think that meat is the bulk of what we're feeding them, if you're feeding your dog today a grocery brand kibble, for example, the majority of that food is actually going to be carbohydrates. And in some recipes, that can be up to 50% carbohydrates. So while we think of it as overfeeding them on protein, their requirement according to AFCO, and that's the American Association of Feed Control, who set basically the requirements of what a dog needs to survive, they basically state that they need to have a minimum of around 20% total dietary protein in their food. Now, if you look to go into an aisle of any of your pet stores and turn bags over, you'll see that a lot of diets are really sitting around that 20-25%. So we're not excessively overfeeding them on protein. We will see diets that do push into the more high protein, and there's key nutritional reasons why. But generally speaking, the protein isn't excessively used, because you've got to also think from a manufacturer standpoint as well. It's quite a costly ingredient. So it is one of those things that's there. Yes, we do overfeed because we don't want them just to survive. They're our fur family. We do want them to truly thrive, and there's some great benefits to having meat protein in their diet. But it is one thing that, yes, you can look at and differentiate between different brands as well.
I guess there's a bigger question too, which is, because I've read that 55.8% of dogs in the United States are overweight. So not as bad as humans, but that's pretty bad. Are we just generally feeding dogs too much? Is there an appropriate ratio of body weight to food that we should be following?
Yeah, this is a really topical issue. Obesity in dogs is becoming one of the biggest threats that we're almost putting on our pets to their health. The knock-on impacts of having a dog who is obese, which is nearly 20% above their body weight, is the same as what we see in humans. Increased osteoarthritis, shorter lifespan, more endocrine diseases as well. And when we drill back to what's causing it, it's very similar to what we see in the human space. We're eating more calorific dense foods. We are overfeeding. I think a nice statistic here is that 98% of all dog parents treat their pet. Absolutely. During COVID, when we were all home and there were multiple people in the house, we actually treated our pets 30% more. So, whilst they've got their base nutrition, not many pet parents go, oh, well, hang on, I'm going to give him an extra treat. I'll reduce his amount. Understanding the importance of, this is his total calories for the day. And if I'm giving extra here, I need to subtract there, isn't something that's intuitive to many pet parents. So yes, we're overfeeding, but we're also then doing human tidbits here and there as well. So, I always use the example, if I gave, my dog an ounce of cheese, from a calorie standpoint, that's like you or I eating 3 hamburgers. So there's calorific foods, there's not enough exercise, but at the end of the day, it's not our pets who are raiding the pantry, it's often us giving them those extra treats.
Well, they say we look like our pets and our pets look like us. Our overweight society is breeding overweight dogs. We should probably change that.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about protein. I noticed that the new Wellness Core Digestive Health plant-based food contains egg protein. Is there simply not enough protein in plant sources?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I think we're on the beginning of a journey of educating pet parents of the opportunity really to start feeding a more plant-based diet. I think pet parents, and what we've done through our own research, is that we know, especially as we talk to more what we call next gen, so millennial and Gen Z pet parents, they're really keen in finding more sustainable protein sources that, are maybe more plant-based. But there's still a caution because, they know that their dog requires a high amount of protein. They want to make sure that there's no digestive upset. And when you work with that sort of guidelines, when we talk to pet parents, we say, well, would you be more open to trying it if maybe there was an egg-based source in it? And this is where 63% of pet parents said, yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So this is kind of helping them start the journey. And I think that's it. We don't want to be very hard and fast that it's, this polarization of you have to be one or the other. It's the more we can encourage more pet parents, even if they start as a flexitarian approach of, almost like the Meatless Monday, start it on a slow process, then we're going to really support them and make sure that they are getting more confidence in this space and therefore more willingness to really focus on supporting more of a plant-based percentage in their dog's diet.
So I've recently begun the journey of transitioning our pets, or we have 2 dogs, to a more plant-based diet. And when I visited a dog food store, the clerk said, you should really be careful about how you switch because you could cause pancreatitis in your dog, which I thought, wow, that's a great sales pitch to buy an extremely expensive food. How do you suggest introducing plant-based alternatives to your dog? What do you need to watch out for?
So a couple of things there. Firstly, I think there's a little bit of misinformation going there. Pancreatitis itself is often caused by a high-fat diet. So we usually see it in the summertime where dogs have gotten into the grill and all the leftovers, and that kind of sends them into an acute shock sort of situation and they end up in the veterinary clinic. I think why a lot of people and some retail stores might be getting confused here is that when they think about the pancreas, its job in essence is to, yes, control insulin and everything else, but also produce digestive enzymes that are needed to digest food. And most dogs have a pancreas that works really well in this task. And the dogs do a really good job of breaking down that starch, so the energy, out of plants. I think they're almost got the same capability as we do as humans. So there's no evidence to indicate that if you're feeding a higher plant-based material that it's going to damage that pancreas in any way. I think as for the element of, what should you watch out if you're considering to feed it and you start feed it, or any of those concerns, it's the same as most diets here. If you've got a pet who's happy and healthy, then, always transition onto any diet, regardless of what brand or what recipe it is, over a 4-day period. So you start 25% of the new, 75 old, and work through it. But the big cautionary tale I have here is, it's not, apples and apples in every case. You've got apples and oranges out there in the competitive landscape. And especially as you think or consider feeding a plant-based diet to your dog, it's really important that you focus on the quality. And I think that's so important because, yes, we've just launched a new plant-based with egg product really focused on digestive health, because we know that's so important for especially those next-gen pet parents who want to focus on the microbiome of their dog. But for us to launch that, it wasn't just crafting it, in a computer system or anything like that. We have animal nutritionists making sure that, the amino acids at the molecular level are all nutritionally complete. We also put it through a 6-month-long feeding trial, to really make sure that there's no challenges or health problems, to make sure it's delivering that quality. So my biggest thing to pet parents is, yes, always look for any, gradually transition. But if you are considering this, make sure you're really picking the best quality, because that's going to minimize those transitionary upsets. But most importantly, make sure that there's no long-term deficiencies, which is something to consider as you move into this space.
So are there symptoms of a bad fit between the dog and what you're feeding them that somebody should watch out for during that 4 days and maybe the week or two after?
Yeah, and these are the common ones if you talk to any pet parent, if they've ever done a transition a little too quickly. And they'll often be like, oh, yes, I saw it within the next day. There was loose stools, maybe extra gas. They're probably the most common. And that often comes as a result of, either it's an ingredient the pet's reacting to, it's a higher amount of dietary fibers or fats. They're key ingredients that can really aggravate and upset tummy. So you want to make sure they're consistent in many cases. They'd be the main ones I'd look for, definitely in that first week. If you're using a brand that maybe hasn't gone through scientific testing, or especially if you're thinking of doing this at yourself as a home cooking positioning, then this is where I would then be worrying more around, could there be long-term nutritional deficiency concerns? So you just need to make sure that as we're changing the way we feed our dogs, that we are doing it the right way. And if you are considering home feeding, then I'd always encourage you to work with an experienced veterinary nutritionist. These guys are used to designing vegetarian diets for pets, often due to a health need, like skin problems, for example, or an allergy. But you need to play caution. So nutritional deficiency long-term, if it's not complete and balanced. Short-term, as I said, the number one sign you'd see is those digestive upsets, often presenting in the stool, which is pretty immediate after first transitioning.
That's great advice. I want to take just a moment to take a commercial break, and we're going to be right back. And we're back talking with veterinarian Dr. Danielle Bernal, who is with natural pet food maker Wellness Natural Pet Food. So we've learned that dogs enjoy vegetables and grains. What advice do you have about mixing in produce or grains with dog food? It's something that a lot of our readers have asked about actually over the years. For instance, could you add blueberries to give them antioxidants, or peas to add protein?
Absolutely. And I think, this is a big trend we're also seeing with pet parents overall. I'm not even including those who, are looking specifically for vegetarian options. We are wanting to enhance the bowl of our pet. The days of just feeding a scoop and serve round and brown kibble and walking away are long gone, I think. Any opportunity where we can put a mixer, a topper, some more vegetables or fruits on top is something that all pet parents are really seeking. And there's a couple good rules of thumb here. The first one is, if you are going to do it, the most important thing, and it sounds, a little bit, questioning in some ways, because like, well, I don't do this for myself, but it's very different for our dogs. The food they eat in regards to, for example, their kibble, it's meticulously designed so that it will represent all their nutrition that they need to truly survive and thrive. Now, if you start adding in extra bits and you keep it to 0 to 10% of their total calories, that's absolutely fine. It's not going to upset that base nutrition. Okay. If you start adding in extra carbohydrates or, broccoli and carrots and all these other things, or meat even, that you're then adjusting that diet, that's when you can lead to imbalance, because they may, for instance, only then get 60% of their base kibble. And that's not going to give them the right levels of amino acids or the right levels of minerals. So my big guidance here is, if you want to top, you want to add some fresh fruits or veggies in, absolutely go for it. Keep it in that less than 10% rule. And that way you'll know that you're really giving them, a bit of freshness of some great plant-based items, but also keeping their nutritional balance complete.
So are there fruits and vegetables that dogs really like that you recommend people try and that are good for them?
Yeah, so my favourites are always, as we look to things like broccoli, apples, carrots, these are some of my top favourites. The great thing here is they're also a little bit crunchy, and that mechanical abrasion as the dog chews will also help clean their teeth. That's super important, because today 80% of adult dogs actually have dental disease. So the more crunchy and more, toothbrush-like effect we can do is a good thing. So those are kind of my top favorites. They're usually loved by dogs, and they're some of the ones I would start with. Are
there vegetables that we should avoid giving to dogs? I think onions, for instance, are bad for them.
Correct. Onions, garlics, any of those fruits, for example, with a seed in it, that, if I think about a peach or a plum, where it can form an intestinal obstruction, they're ones to most definitely stay away from. But then others you may not think about are examples like grapes and raisins. There's been studies to show that they can, for instance, cause kidney problems. Yeah, especially in summer, people say, I freeze my grapes and I give them to my dog. That's one to definitely avoid.
So let's talk a little about special dietary needs, such as for dogs with a urinary tract problem. I have one, or an older dog with a sensitive stomach. How do you recommend introducing plant-based alternatives, and what do you look for with those animals when you're doing the transition? Yeah, so it's unique. And, as a veterinarian, when it comes to those sort of medical and disease states, there's so many factors that can be causing that problem. If I think to urinary upsets, for example, it's a very common one in cats. In dogs, it's still common. But what we know is that in most cases for a urinary tract issue, it's going to be a bacterial infection in dogs. So not really related to food at all. Then as we think to skin problems, for example, or should I say digestive problems, anything around that sensitivities, it'll also depend. Is it a food allergy, or is it a sensitivity, or is it that they've just got their microbiome out of balance? So the big thing here, I would always say, is if you've got a pet who has some kind of significant health problem, speak to your veterinarian. They will always try and help you on whatever journey you want to feed your pet, but they'll also make sure that whatever the recommendation is, it's not going to upset that condition, because often it's very multifactorial in regards to what's causing it. But that said, just because your dog may have to go on a prescription diet, for example, that, maybe isn't exactly what you want to feed from an ingredient standpoint, it doesn't mean that there's no more options for you. An example is this year we launched out a new plant-based topper, which is all around immune health, knowing that many cases like these, pet parents have to feed a specific diet, but they want to give a functional meal enhancement, and they don't want to have, the complicating factor of proteins in there that may not be suitable or just not what they want to feed. So we've gone into that space as well, also having plant-based functional bowl boosters to be able to give those customers options as well. Really pleased to see that Wellness is partnering with TerraCycle to provide a free mail-in recycling program for the packaging. Can you talk about how that works, and what does the customer have to do? Save up a bunch and send it all at once?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really quite alarming when you think about it, that in most cases, all those big bags of pet food aren't actually recyclable. So, we at Wellness were one of the first US-based pet food companies to actually partner with TerraCycle, and we've been with them for years. Mm-hmm. And what this organization does is it takes those bags of pet food packaging and basically upcycles them into, things that can be used back in the environment, like playgrounds, like chairs, like, out in the park, so to speak. But all they have to do here is simply log on to TerraCycle, look for a drop-off location, and then, drop that bag into it, and then the rest is taken care of. So, have a look on there. We've always got that logo on our packaging, so you'll know it is TerraCyclable, and then go to their website and you'll be able to find it. And since we've started this initiative, we've saved over 480,000 bags from landfill. So I think that's a fabulous start.
That is, but the question is, how many drop-off locations are there? And are there ways for people who want to help drive the recycling to create drop-off locations?
Yeah, there definitely is. I think there are people who can take, I want to be one of those spots so they can get right behind it. It does vary as to where you are in the US. They have got a pretty decent footprint in regards to locations, and there's been more and more stores really getting behind it. Even in the pet food world, we were one of the first, but now it's a thing that most brands are really trying to support. So the more manufacturers that are on board, it really helps. Even a lot of pet food stores are saying, we want to make an impact. So they've nominated themselves to be that drop-off location. So the biggest thing I would say is, just because it is so vast and varied across here, the US, to go onto the website, look in your local area, and I think you'll be surprised as to how many there actually are in your neighborhood.
So what is wellness planning in terms of expanding plant-based options? And are you going to be doing cat foods as well?
Yeah, so it's something, we are striving for meaningful reduction. All those statistics you mentioned at the beginning are something we as an organisation are cognizant of. And we want to make sure that our footprint is always reducing and, we're doing the right things for the future. From an innovation standpoint, I think in the last year alone, we've launched out 2 products, as I mentioned, that Wellness Core plant-based with egg digestive health recipe. We've also launched out that new Wellness Core Bowl Boosters immune health functional one, which is all around plant-based as well. So we're definitely starting. I think it's still very much ahead of its time. So it's a lot of education that needs to go into it with pet parents, raising it exactly like we're doing here, talking about how it's safe, how it's scientifically proven. And then from an innovation standpoint, we've got more options, most definitely upstream in our pipelines, to look at how we expand these portfolios. But we've also got other products, which, we have a business called Whimsy's Dental Chews, which is highly successful dental products to help clean dogs' teeth. And they are 100% vegan, in fact, in that we've designed those to be just potato-based. So, that's a key part of our organisation and growing year on year. So as we help more pet parents move off, say, body parts or move off competitor products, which include a lot of chicken, these are other great ways where we're doing it. And for us, it's not just also innovation. We also have multiple manufacturing facilities, and we're trying to always strive towards zero waste for those. Even little things like reusing the heat from our machines to, warm the offices. It's something that from a corporate standpoint, it's near and dear to us, that's for sure. So early stages for now, but something that we're always looking to pursue.
Well, we are taking these first steps. How do you envision the pet food industry changing over the next couple of decades? Do you think that there's a general industry trend to move away from meat, or is this really going to be its own market competing with the meat-based market?
I think, if we look to the human world, I think we've seen people really adapt and bring it in. I don't think it is quite the competitive. I even use the example of my household. We strive to have meatless, Monday nights, and we strive to take more of a cognizant approach to reducing our footprint. And I think the big learning here is that we know, especially those next-gen pet parents, they do this for their own life and they want to do this for their pet. So I think to that point, it's early days now. I think at the moment it's sort of competing in regards to, should I feed this one or should I feed that one? I think as more companies sort of dalliance into here, and as more brands, not just the niche ones, but more of the big companies like ourselves, like some of the other big, large multinationals, move into this space, I think it'll become the success that we've seen in human. And I think we have to all go there as an organization. As you said in the beginning, this is a key part of food consumption in the protein world. There's lots of innovation into the insects world, lots of other ways of making sure, we can reduce that footprint in beef and chicken especially. So for now, I say very much developing, but I think it's going to become part of the norm if we fast forward 10 years.
So our listeners always like a good deal. Is there a way to get started with plant-based foods
Yeah, absolutely. So, for us, the big thing is, if you go onto our own website, wellnesspetfood.com, go to the section labeled Our Community, and in there we've got coupons. That would be the first step to sort of go. The other thing I would say is, a lot of the independent pet specialties and even the large retail chains or the e-commerce brands, they all have continual sales and promotions. So even reaching out to those guys, seeing what activity is going on, you'll probably be able to see some kind of promotion. And remember too, all of our foods, including our plant-based recipes, always have a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're thinking about trying a plant-based food, even if it is just to introduce it a couple of times a week into your dog's diet, then, there's no risk to trying it. You'll see, as I said, this is a scientifically proven option from wellness that's going to make sure that, yes, it's helping reduce the footprint with a meatless recipe, but most importantly, it's still delivering, which is our commitment to pets, which is a lifetime of well-being shared with their pet parents. So I think that for us is the perfect sweet spot. And eventually over time, it's going to really help the environment as well.
Danielle, thank you very much for taking time to talk with us today. Really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure.
We've been talking with Dr. Danielle Bernal. She is a veterinarian at Wellness Natural Pet Foods, and you can find out more about wellness at www.wellnesspetfood.com. Wellness Pet Food is all one word, no space, no dash. Folks, it's been interesting reading about this, preparing for this conversation, and other research we've done on plant-based foods and insect-based foods for dogs. Human and dog biomes have actually been converging over the course of evolution. And as a result, we have fat dogs, just like we have too many fat people in the United States and some other parts of the world. And a plant-based diet is a path out of our unhealthy lifestyles, both for us and the animals we share our homes with. So take a few minutes to learn a little more about plant-based alternatives for your dog or cat, if you have one. And let's start the journey towards something better for all of us, animals, people, and the environment. This is Earth911, Sustainability in Your Ear. We're going to be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, I hope you'll take a few minutes to share this podcast and all the others that we've done with your friends and family, people that you work with, so that we get more ideas out there and create less waste in this world. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.